All right. Well, Daniel, so it's so good to see you. I'm glad we're running this again. We want to share about our ideas of side effects and how to apply it. I know you've been very busy recently, and especially last week, trying to work on looking at students' data. Look at students of special education, look at what they've done, what they have not done. Can you share how we might apply the side effects idea, to understanding student data?
Great, thank you, Professor Zhao. Yeah, so we went through a big trove of data these past 2 weeks, really kind of disaggregating the data and trying to see what's going on with our students. And one of the things that kept coming up in my mind is this metaphor I have about data and maps. So a map is a kind of a picture of what the map maker wants you to pay attention to. So a map that is like an atlas that tells you how to get from point A to point B, shows you all the roads and all the things you need to know to navigate those roads. Maybe there's a map maker who's wanted you to focus on specific types of plants in certain areas. They're going to focus on those plants. And the big idea behind maps is we think that they're objective, but not really. Maps are the product of what the map maker wants you to notice and wants to point out in the environment. And you should never confuse the map for the real thing. Same thing with student data, right? We have student data that is collected and we're trying to look at certain aspects of the data and see which parts are telling us what stories, but we have to step back and realize that what data elements we picked out are the ones that are picked out by the person collecting the data, and they're not objective. It's a subjective decision to do that. So when you think about that, you can think about the data that is shown and the data that is not shown to you, the data that is not collected. And we want to think about, well, what are the side effects that are coming up for our students where no data is collected? What are the long-term outcomes where no data is collected? What are the academic outcomes? What are the non-cognitive outcomes where data is collected? So I think we really need to think about that when we look at student data.
So yeah, I mean, if you think about that, it's I like what you said a lot about the data we collect do not necessarily mean the data we want. I know in education nowadays, we talk about evidence-based, data-driven, and a lot of times the data we collect do not necessarily represent the students' long-term, non-cognitive, or the students' growth as an individual. A lot of times it's required. It's as if the government or school systems to say, yes, we need to collect this data about students. But how do we know that data we collected matters? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We're missing kind of the larger piece of the puzzle, which is what is the purpose of education in, at least in America, for instance, and across the world? Like, what do we actually want to see happen to our children who we put into this rigorous thing that's, 12, 13 years long? What are we getting out of that? Is it just a daycare? Do we want them to be able to recite some numbers, or do we want them to be interested in learning? Do we want them to have a fire that's lit inside of them to continue learning, to be entrepreneurial, to be exploring their world? I don't know. What do you think, Professor Zhao?
Well, I think that's precisely why we are asking the question. When we wrote the article about side effects, we're not necessarily trying to say what is more important, what is less important. It's for you to consider, for everyone to consider, what matters. What matters. And if we are trying to do what matters, are we neglecting others? What matters to a system? What matters to a school? What matters to our students? What matters to a teacher? I think we need to seriously reflect on that. One final point I want to say, I think for all of us, all educators, we have a moral obligation to help students grow. And if that growth is in contradiction with what the systems require, we might have to pause and to say, what we need to do the right thing, not to do the thing right. Thank you.